News Radio 840 WHAS, Bob Sokoler, and the Louisville Real Estate Show here with you till the top of the hour. And joining us on today's show, Kevin Dissler over at Pitt and Frank Attorneys. You can pick the closing attorney that you want, and I can highly recommend the folks at Pitt and Frank Attorneys. You can reach them at 895-9900. Also here, Brad Lawler, owner of Home Team Inspection Service. They come in as a team. They are ranked #1 among home team inspection services in the country, 7 years in a row, hopefully soon to be 8. And by the way, when does that happen, Brad?
Its results go through the end of December, so we'll know third week of January.
I hope I'm not jinxing it. Anyway, I got a feeling I did. You can reach Brad at 844-411-TEAM to help you, and you can pick the inspectors that you want, and they do a great job. And I can tell you from personal experience. All right, so we're still doing our COVID show, which means we're on Zoom. You can go to our website and you can see the show on video. LouisvilleAnswers.com, just so you know, is where you can see the videos that we produce from the radio show. LouisvilleAnswers.com, and I'm trying to stick these up on a regular basis on Facebook whenever we've got that. So I mean, we'll see what happens. I'm not sure what happens, but I'm playing around with what views people see as we're talking here. So okay, so we send me an email if you want a question on the show. You probably hopefully have heard this before. Bob at WeSellLouisville.com, radio question in the subject line, and then the question itself in the body of the email. So we're going to start, Kevin, with you. Kenny owns property, and this is an interesting question. He owns property that has a gravel road on it, and just looked up and saw the word that he doesn't understand associated with the gravel road. It's servitude of passage. Kenny's asking, what does that mean? Do you know what that means as an attorney? I know you got those highfalutin words that you pass around.
The
servitude of passage.
Servitude of passage. Well, I'm assuming that you go back and there was a large farm that was divided up into two smaller farms, and the adjoining county highway. One of the tracks is servitude to the other, so that to get the crops to market, you have the right to go over the other track in order to get to the county road. So your property has servitude to the other one, which is basically that yours is burdened by the other's right to use the easement, usually for access to a publicly maintained roadway. So I'm assuming that's what he's referring to. It goes back to the old days when the law would use certain terms that in today's environment of political correctness, probably not a really good idea to use anymore.
Got it.
Servitude.
Yeah, probably not. Yes. Yeah, not servitude. Not the best of words. So we've got another question for Brad here. Burke, thinking of selling his home either later this year or next, but he has pets, and he's wondering, will a home inspector report pet damage in their report? Also, how do buyers feel about pets in homes?
So pet damage, we'd have to define what area it is. If it's just a drywall, if it's scratches on a door, scratches around a door jamb, those are not going to get into our report because those would be considered cosmetic. However, one of the things that we often see are dogs that use the outdoor compressor as their fire hydrant, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
That is very corrosive to those compressors, and because of that, we will note damage to that. We had one the other day that the urine had eaten all the way through a set of the fins on a corner of it.
Wow.
It had been going on for so long. So that type of damage, yes. Any sort of damage that's been done to like conduit, where a pet might have chewed on conduit, something that could be a safety hazard, those would certainly make the report. But carpet, just general, wall and trim damage, it wouldn't make an inspector's report.
Trim damage because it's cosmetic, is that why?
Right, correct. Yeah.
So to answer the second part of Burke's question, how do buyers feel about pets in homes? I have to tell you that it really depends on if there's a strong appearance of those pets. If there are odors, then you've got a problem. I can remember about 4 months or so ago, we had a house, beautiful house, but the lower levels where the pets were and the carpeting in that lower level, they tried to clean it but you could smell dog odor in the lower level. And every time we had a showing, there was feedback that went to the seller and me that the pet odor was a turnoff. So what they ended up having to do is remove the carpet and the padding and do a cleaning of the concrete, because let's face it, that the odors get in there, and then put down new padding and an inexpensive carpet. But that did the trick. We sold it almost immediately. And I should point out that if you think covering up the pet odors with a candle scent or one of those Glade. Have you seen the new thing Glade has now? It stands by itself. It doesn't plug in. This little canister that fits inside of it. It's about $15 for the unit. And it sprays every 7 minutes or 15. Anyway, it's the worst thing you could do when you're selling your house, because a buyer agent who's knowledgeable knows you're covering up scent. Yeah, just the worst thing that you could do. So the best thing what I tell all of our clients to do is your key is bake some bread, some brownies, leave them out with a little note and some water in, if it's cold, ice cold water that in some way of keeping it cold. And that way they little note that says, hey, no, you're seeing some homes today, so here's something to help you on your way. So they remember you as the nice house, and they smell bread rather than a pet odor. So then try to, if you're
just to say it's we
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, you think it's just the odor, but we've had several instances where the cat odor gets into hardwood floor.
Yeah.
And it's a, significant issue. You almost have to replace the hardwood floor. So it's, when you smell that, it's just not a superficial issue.
No. I mean, if you can't bake bread and cover up the odor or eliminate it, you got a problem on your hands.
Well, but I think the other problem too is that I think that's where the agents can help, because sometimes when you're living in that space, you become nose blind to it, right? You don't smell it anymore. I mean, we've had instances where people have had cats that have used the crawl space area in the house, particularly those that have a basement crawl space setup. Cats get in the crawl space, they use that as a giant litter box, and the family doesn't even notice that it's there, just because they become nose blind to those smells.
Oof. Yeah. So where you're going with this, and I know exactly where you're going, is that it's incumbent upon the realtor when he walks in. But here's the problem. And I'm a very honest person, and I will tell the seller, as I did with this one I was telling you 4 months ago when I first went in there, that there is a strong odor of pet. Now, a lot of realtors are afraid to mention that, because then the owners are already thinking, oh, this guy doesn't like pets, and we're not going to use him or her because they don't like that. So there is a trade-off, and I get that loud and clear. But I'd rather be honest on the front end and not get the job than have them calling me and saying, why isn't it selling? And then you have to tell them, well, it was an odor, and they say, well, why didn't you tell me that when we first got together? So I understand. All right, Kev, JJ owns a home with half an acre of land, and he says there are 2 trees on the side of his house that sit directly on the property line. He's sending us an email. So you got the picture? There's he owns a home and half an acre right down the middle. 2 trees sit on the property line. He wants to put up a fence up, but he's wondering, can he legally cut down the trees without the neighbor's permission? So that's an interesting one, because they're right on the property line, and who knows if the property line is legit. You're thinking it might be, right?
Well, yeah, first of all, you'd have to get a survey to make sure that what you think is the property line is actually the property line. And if the actual trunk and the root structures on both properties, you kind of have joint ownership of that tree. So first, the thing you do is you try to see if you can get the neighbor's permission to do it. And short of that, you may have to adjust the fence line, just because if you cut down the tree, he owns half of it, you do without his permission, he may be able to come back against you. I suggest it provides shade to the backyard, enhances the value of his property. So it's generally good to go over and talk to your neighbor and get permission.
So I think you're onto something there, just so you know. And I've seen this happen where a fence install company puts the fence up to the tree, up to one side of the tree, continues it on the other side of the tree, though, mind you, putting in the posts could damage the tree roots. So that can be a problem. What I would highly suggest, and I think you're going to agree, you go over to your neighbor and say, hey, listen, I'm paying for the fence, but I want to do this and this, and see if you can come to an agreement. And if that's the case, if they do come to an agreement, Kevin, do you put that in writing? Is it so important?
Yeah, I definitely would, because then the other issue is, especially if your fence you could actually do a formal easement agreement that you put of record, because your neighbor that you have the agreement with may sell their property. So then you've got a new party that was not subject to whatever your handshake or your informal agreement was. So it's a good idea to go ahead and get that in writing. And if you can, to actually put it of record, especially if it's going to be a fairly expensive fence, and with the price of wood and other materials now, pretty much anything's expensive these days. So with an investment like that, it'd be a good idea to put it in writing, get an easement agreement.
And so go to an attorney and don't pull one off the internet. I'm suspecting you're going to tell us.
They're good for generic situations, but unfortunately, life never serves us up too many generic situations. You have specific facts, you need an attorney locally.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I do. All right, hopefully that answers that question. We're going to move on in just a second, but first we're going to take a break, as we're already halfway through the show. With us and continuing with us, Kevin Dissler, Pitt and Frank Attorneys, 895-9900. Also, Brad Lawler, owner of Home Team Inspection Service, 844-411-TEAM. And you can reach me, Bob Sokoler, anytime on my cell phone for selling or just talking about the process of selling or buying. 376-5483 is my direct cell phone number. That's 376-5483. We're back in a moment on News Radio 840 WHAS. News Radio 840 WHAS. Bob Sokoler, the Louisville Real Estate Show, here with you till the top of the hour. Still with us, Brad Lawler, owner of Home Team Inspection Service. They come in as a team. You can reach them and Brad specifically, 844-411-TEAM. Also, Kevin Dissler, who is a great guy over at Pitt and Frank Attorneys. You can pick the attorney that you want to close your loan, and I can highly recommend Pitt and Frank, 895-9900. And you can reach me, Bob Sokoler, to help you with your house, to list it or just plan to list it now or in the future, or to buy a home. 376-5483. That's 376-5483. One of the things we are going to be talking about this segment is tips to help make your home more energy efficient. And we're going to try to do this on a regular basis because when winter is coming, that's going to be a problem. And so one of the things everyone's talking about is, and we've talked, Brad, in the past, replace regular light bulbs with LED. They've come down in price dramatically, correct?
Yes, they have. Great choice. Just make sure you pick the right color, the temperature of the bulb, right?
Right. So 2,800 to 3,000 is more of what we're used to inside, which is a warmer light. 5,000 Kelvin is daylight, but it's also cold. It's like an office or a hospital. You don't want to do that. Another tip would be to use LED lights for decorations for the holidays. Don't go back to the old way. Go new way. It'll save you a lot of money. And then close unused vents and doors and lower the temperature of your house by just a degree or two. I know it can be difficult because I don't like cold either, but it will save you a lot of money.
Since we have an expert here, do you mind if I ask a quick question?
You better believe it.
On LED lighting, this is for Mr. Lawler. Do they require, this is for my home, a special type of outlet to be, you have to upgrade? Like I've got floodlights. You have to or can lights, do they have to be upgraded?
No, you don't. The only thing you need, though, is that most of the time now, all LEDs are dimmable. There are still some non-dimmable. Those will not work on a rheostat type of dimmer. They'll hum and they'll make a lot of noise. They may not even turn on. So that's the only challenge that you have. But if you've got a dimmer switch, just make sure that you get a dimmable LED bulb.
Good. Yeah. Okay. And it'll use a lot less electricity.
Yeah, much less.
You'll be going, wow. Mm-hmm. All right. So, Brad, Adam writes in. He says he's a first-time home seller, and he listens to our show all the time, and he's wondering if we could review the advantages of having a pre-home inspection before he puts his home on the market. Good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've got a lot of people that are asking about what we call a pre-listing inspection. Why would you do it? Why would you spend $500 or $600, based on the square footage of your house, to have someone come out, do an inspection on the house, and then knowing that the buyer's probably going to have an inspection done later? The difference is that when you do a pre-listing inspection, you're able to spot the defects. The home inspector is going to look at it, probably even a little bit finer detail than just the buyer's home inspector. They'll come in and they'll identify those things that need to be corrected, those safety items, those minor repairs, those bigger repairs. And then that allows the homeowner to actually work with their own contractors under a little bit more time, which should allow for a less costly repair to be made. They document, they have receipts of everything that they have done. But really, I think the pre-listing inspections are helping sellers protect the equity that's in their home, rather than having the buyer's home inspector find things that they address, give to the buyer, and then the buyer wants the things fixed a particular way. So it's kind of taking care of all of those problems in advance, doing them on your own terms. And I think that it's just it provides some peace of mind to the seller, knowing that they're entering into that transaction, that really there shouldn't be any surprises. When the buyer's home inspector comes in, they should find nothing, or the seller already knows what they're going to find.
And I think there's one more thing you missed on this, and that is, if you get a pre-inspection, you've got a list to work off of. You can do this yourself, or if you got a father or uncle or a friend who's handy.
Right.
Whereas once you have the home on the market and a buyer has an inspector come in and the inspector produces a report, the buyer's agent is going to request that those items be fixed by a licensed professional.
Right.
Which could cost you a lot more money. You could probably easily pay for the cost of a pre-inspection. And let's face it, if you can save a lot of money by doing the repairs yourself, or have a friend do it, I think it's smart, as long as it's done properly, right? That's the
and I think that's the whole point. There is, how is it done? A GFCI. We know a lot of people have plenty of skills. They can change out a faulty GFCI by themselves, but not everybody knows how to do that. So I think it's just depends on the homeowner's skills. But you're right. I mean, it's a more cost-effective way of making those repairs versus having the licensed electrician come in and do something that a handyman can do for significantly less money, or the homeowner just doing it for the cost of the part.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example and we'll move on. So I think if you go to one of the big box stores and you buy a GFCI outlet, relatively lesser expensive ones, maybe 13 or 14 bucks, you think, Brad?
Yeah, about that. Right. I'd say about 15 bucks.
Yeah. So if you bring in an electrician, I'm talking maybe a year or two cost, but it could have gone up, and probably it has, but at least 75 bucks to do the same job.
Oh, every bit of that. Oh, yeah.
So folks, you can see how it pays to get that pre-inspection, so you know what to do and what to work on ahead of time, which will minimize the repair request and the aggravation that you face later. Okay.
Right.
I was just going to say, from a negotiation standpoint, doing it beforehand, because we had a situation where people were tending to put properties under contract for a fairly high purchase price, and they were using the home inspection, which is supposed to be for necessary repairs, to almost come up with a list of improvements. And so you've got a lot of situations where you're trying to renegotiate that price down. So if you do it beforehand, you kind of identify these are all the repair items that need to be done. So then when the buyer brings in theirs, you have something to base your opinion on, that this is not necessary. It happened quite often in the situation where everybody was just running to get anything under contract.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a really good idea.
Kevin, this one's from Manny, who's apparently renting an apartment, and he's wondering about the landlord or maintenance person coming into the apartment without anyone being home. Can they just simply come into the apartment, and if there's a repair that's needed, or the landlord wants to inspect the apartment, is he just able to do that willy-nilly?
Well, it depends upon the lease, but usually you have to provide reasonable prior notice before you come into the property. Usually the leases provide, if there's something extraordinary that could perhaps cause a threat to either the building or the safety of other residents, then they'd have the right, in kind of an emergency situation. You left gas on, gas stove, they'd have the right to come in and go ahead and shut it off. So usually it's the terms of the lease, and usually it's reasonable prior notice before entry for just normal things. Usually landlords will come and do an inspection every now and then, but they usually do have a clause in something critical or an emergency situation they can have entry. So I'm just not certain what his situation was.
Got it. Misty writes in, Brad, that she's constantly hearing people confuse the words porch, patio, deck. She's planning on buying her first home, and she's kind of confused herself. So she'd like us to give an actual definition of what is a porch, patio, and deck. And then is it easier as she goes along looking for a home for an inspector to see one and look at one and okay one over another? Thoughts?
Okay, porch, patio, deck. Yeah, somewhat interchangeable words. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll give you my definition, how we look at it. A porch is a structure on the front of the home that is attached to the home. It is a part of the foundation. It may have a crawl space underneath it. It may be solid, but that's going to be the porch. The
And
deck
may or may not have a roof over it or some sort of covering.
Yes, that's correct. I mean,
Okay.
I think we also throw in stoop. I mean, there's some other words that get thrown in there for landings. For a patio is something that is ground level. So it's going to be it will essentially be just a concrete pad, a paver's pad actually on the ground. A deck is something that is elevated. It can either be freestanding, so it has its own support columns holding it up, or it can be cantilevered off of the home itself and attached to the home through a system of ledger boards and cantilevers. But that's going to be a deck. Those decks can be, anything from, a few inches off the ground to, 30, 40 feet in the air.
Are the ones that are a few inches off the ground the most difficult for an inspector to?
They are hard because of the fact we can't get underneath them to see how they are structured. Now, the one nice thing about those is they are not a fall hazard. So really, when you're looking at the decking, you're going to know kind of what the status is. The problem with an elevated deck is if they fall away from the house, say they're just held on with nails rather than bolts, then you can have a risk of severe injury when those fall versus the ones that are real low to the ground.
Yeah, one other quick thing while we're on this, brick and brick veneer, interchangeable by many, but there really is a difference. Explain that if you would, Brett.
Well, so there are some buildings that are actually brick, and that's brick all the way, through, where the walls are made out of brick. They're not made out of a masonry or any other material. Brick veneer is what's more common with us, and that is really just a shell that is put up around a house and is held on with ties, a metal tab that connects the brick to the structure of the home. But there's actually a space in between the brick and the actual structural wall of the home.
So many buyers still believe that brick, if it's a brick veneer, it's not as good as a brick home. And that's a misconception, right?
It is, and there you don't see a whole lot of brick homes, or some of the old buildings downtown. We might be able to say are brick construction, but there's not many homes that are actual true brick construction. They're all brick veneer.
And just to clarify that, if the roof is resting on the brick itself, that would be a brick home.
It has to be the structural element to make it a brick home. Brick veneer is non-load bearing.
Got it. That would be the difference, but they're just as good. In fact, maybe better in some ways.
Better, yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question here. Kevin, Samantha says her dad wrote a handwritten will and has passed away. His wife now has contested the will. By the way, the wife is Samantha's stepmother. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Probably.
I hate when we get
it.
Yeah. So Samantha is asking, what can she do if the stepmother tries to sell the house? Is there anything she needs to worry about, Samantha? So in other words, I guess the dad wrote the will leaving the house to Samantha. The wife, which is Samantha's stepmother, contested the will. And now Samantha's worried the stepmother's going to try to sell the house. What happens?
Well, handwritten, what's called holographic wills are legal and valid in Kentucky. And of course, you can contest a will based on capacity or influence, a bunch of different things. What happens, I think, in a similar situation is the concern being you may have the will that says, I want the house to go to my daughter. But a lot of times when people do things, like we talked about getting a form off the line, they forget that the house is titled jointly with survivorship. So if you had her stepmother and her father owning the house jointly with survivorship, even though he put in the will that he wanted to go to the daughter, immediately upon his death, technically the house was immediately owned by her stepmother.
How do you cure that then, Kev? Because that's crazy, right?
it happens all the time because people with the will, you can only, the will provides I give what I own when I die. Which is common with couples in Kentucky. You take jointly with survivorship. My deed's that way. Most people that are married, their deeds are that way. And legally, when your last breath goes out from you, the real estate automatically vests with the other person on that deed. Mm-hmm. So you don't actually own the house when you die. So that everyone needs to get a will. And when you either try to do it yourself, there are a lot of online sources. I really strongly recommend you sit down with the local attorney, but you also got to pull up the deed, and you have to see that how that is titled. You have to pull up your 401k, who's the beneficiary on that. We had one where the beneficiary was an ex-wife from 12 years ago, and the guy just forgot to take it off his 401k. So that led to a nice litigation on that. So even though you're going to do a handwritten will or you go online and pull off a will, you got to see how the property's vested. This happened, same situation to a good friend. She lost about $300,000 or $400,000 because of it.
So as we leave you here, we're out of time, folks. Just take this from us that this is nothing to leave up in the air, thinking that it will be settled if you pass away. This creates problems for the families and for everyone left behind. And so do yourself and your families a favor and talk to an attorney. You can talk to anybody out there. They'll be able to help you. But as we go, I will tell you, Kevin Dissler is a great guy to get some advice from. He's given me advice on a regular basis. And you can reach him at 895-9900. Thanks, Kevin, because that was a really good point to be made here. Also, I would highly recommend, because I've used him before, Brad Lawler, that Home Team Inspection Service, 844-411-TEAM. Great guy. And then if you want to reach out to me anytime, if you're thinking about selling, it's a big world out there and it's changing. I'm more than happy to talk to you either in person or Zoom, or we can get together at your house and come up with a plan and talk about it. It's free and it's no obligation, so it doesn't hurt to give me a call. And if you're looking to buy, we can help you as well. You can reach me at 376-5483 or go to bobsellmyhome.com and we'll communicate with you. We are out of time. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for being out there. We'll see you next Sunday on News Radio 840 WHAS.